This is Real Estate Development Land to Legacy.
Real estate development.
Today, we have not just your average real estate professional, but an expert on human behavior who holds a master's degree in psychology and employs proven strategies on how understanding human behavior can be a game changer in personal and professional success. Mrs. Sonny Moyers, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Eugene. I'm pleased to be here. Thanks for having
You
me
must be you must be an amazing negotiator. Tell me about your toughest case.
My toughest case. Gosh, there's been so many of them. I will tell you a story about commercial real estate that would be interesting, maybe.
Great.
I had this gentleman that I wanted to, had worked with him in a consulting capacity. But when I called him and asked him to let me be his tenant rep in large buildings, he told me that he had 5 or 6 other brokers and none of them had signed an exclusive agreement and that he wasn't going to sign one with me. And I asked him to give me a chance to help him find his next building. His typical lease was about 20 to 25,000 square feet in a large Class A or Class B building. And so I had tried for several years to crack him and get him to let me be his agent and his exclusive agent, because I only worked with clients on an exclusive basis. And finally, after a long time, I called him and asked him to, if I could help him find his location or help him with his real estate. He went, gave me the same story. He said, Sonny, I don't need you. I've got several people that can help me do what I need to do. And his name, I'll give his name is Chet, because I changed the names in my book. I tell the story in my book. I said, well, Chet, tell me, what is your biggest problem? He said, what do you mean? I said, what's the biggest problem in your business? And he said, well, I have 3 locations that are all over 20,000 square feet. And the broker that helped me with him, with those locations, I called him and asked him to go back in with me and renegotiate the leases. And he told me he wouldn't be willing to do that. And I said, well, why did he tell you he wouldn't do it? He said, well, he didn't want to make the landlords mad because he might have to work with them again in the future. So I told Chet, I'll be glad to do it with you. I'll go and renegotiate those leases, and I'll do it on a consulting basis, and you can pay me out of the money you save on those leases. And he gave me a chance to do that. I renegotiated the 3 leases and then later became his broker exclusive and did over 250,000 square feet of office space with him over the next 15 years. And he became one of my best clients ever. So I think it's a persistence and being willing to do something that other people might not be willing to do. When I offered to renegotiate those leases and we were successful in doing that, I made a really nice compensation for doing that. I got a percentage of what I saved him on those leases. And that started a relationship with him that lasted for many years.
How did your experience and knowledge of psychology help you with that?
Well, I think the big thing was that I had to find a reason for him to give me a chance. And when I asked him what his biggest problem was, he was surprised by that. And later on, he explained that he was surprised that I would be willing to do something that no one else would do that he had talked to. So I think when you look for an opportunity to be with someone, to work with someone, I think you have, from a psychology perspective, you have to look for something that makes you stand out and be different. And sometimes that's asking an unusual question. And I'm often surprised, that when you ask a question of someone that you wonder if they're going to answer it. But when they do, you find out all kinds of things that you didn't know. So, for example, asking him his biggest problem and his admitting to me that he was having trouble paying the rent in those 3 locations was probably difficult for him to do. Everybody's got an ego, right? And admitting that you're having a problem is sometimes difficult. So they have to learn to trust you.
Why do you think he told you the truth?
I think because the way I approached it, he had nothing to fear. He had no fear that I would be judgmental because I had spoken to him numerous times. He had always told me no, and I never reacted in a hostile way. I never hung up the phone in a huffy type, way. And the fact that I was willing to, and I think he was surprised that I was caring about him, because most real estate brokers, they work for a commission, right? And what's on their mind most of the time is making money. My mind wasn't on making money. My mind was on building a relationship. And I think that's something else that's important to bring to your audience, and whether it's about land or development or whatever. But I think when you put the other person first, and they know that your fiduciary responsibility to them will be true, meaning that if they become a client, they're going to put you first, not your compensation first. And I think that's something different. Most real estate agents are thinking commission. I'm thinking problem solving. So, for example, when someone comes to me, and I've had this happen numerous times, and said to me, I've got a problem with a piece of property. I'm not sure what to do with it. I always say to them, what have you tried? And they've explained what they've tried and it didn't work. And then I go back to basics and say, what do you think the property is best suited for? Best use of property is an important thing, a very important thing in commercial real estate, particularly land, because people often begin a project and they don't even bother to think, what is the best use of this property? They think, I want to do this with it, or I want to do that with it. But sometimes they want to do something with the property that's not the best use. In residential real estate, I'll give you a really good example. Homeowner wanted to build a particular type home on a golf course, and they bought the most expensive lot on that golf course, which was around, at the time, $500,000 for that lot. Now, the typical 5,000 square foot lot on the golf course with a lot of frontage or abutting to the golf course land, a lot of feet of abutting to the golf course. A lot of people know that when you build on a lot like that, you have to build a home commensurate with the size of the lot, right? It's got to be, it makes sense for the best use of that lot. But he didn't do that. He didn't have me as an agent. He didn't have an agent at the time. He built a 3,000 square foot home on one of the best lots in the entire neighborhood. And a few years later, he called me to help him sell that home. And here was the problem. The land value was $500,000, but because he put a 3,000 square foot home on that lot, which was best suited for a 5,000 square foot home, he had a very high cost per square foot for the size of the home compared to other homes in the area. And so he had a problem. He had a real estate problem. And it couldn't be solved with just saying it's a beautiful golf course lot. Most people expect a 4,000 to 5,000 square foot home on that kind of a lot. So when I go back to this best use idea that we've been talking about, or I've been talking about, many people come up with a vision or an idea. And ideas are easy to come up with. Executing them and making them work is not quite so easy. All right. So I think his vision got in the way of what he should have done. Even if he didn't want a 4,000 square foot home, for resale reasons, he should have built a 4,000 square foot home or bigger. Okay. So best use in commercial real estate is the same thing. Someone calls you up, and I had a gentleman call me up and say, I want to take some land, and I want to build a garage for high value vehicles, collections of cars. And I want people to rent one or more bays of this garage, and it'll have a kitchen with it. It'll have a place to hang out, kind of like a man cave. And people do this. You may have come across it. But he wanted to do this, and so he said, let's go look at land. I said, wait, before we go looking at land, because if you look at a piece of property and you don't examine what's the best use of that real estate, if it's not what you're trying to build, you better leave it alone. Because trying to make something fit, for example, I need 8 acres, but the 8 acres that they choose doesn't really fit the needs they had. So the best use of land is an important concept people need to think about. And many people, many realtors, because they work on commission, the first thing that the client says is, let's go look at land. And the realtor says, great, get in my car, let's go look at land. That's a mistake. The realtor should really take the time to understand what is the project, how complex is it, what amount of land they need, and how the best use, and what property would look the best look of that property from a shape, location, and all those various factors before they start looking at property. But most real estate agents are anxious to get someone in the car and start showing them property. And that's a mistake most often.
Right, because they are more transaction oriented rather than actually goal oriented. They're trying to understand what it is that the client wants.
Yeah, my
Is that how
book.
you understand it?
Yeah, my book is about consultative selling, collaborative selling, not product-oriented selling. I never look at it as selling a lease or selling a home or selling a commercial building. I look at it as what are the needs? What problem are we going to solve? What solutions can we bring to bear? And as a result, the client retains me. And if that happens, and I work with them in a solutions-oriented way, a consultative way, they usually buy what they need to buy, and it's kind of after the fact. It's kind of, it happens. It's not because I'm pushing a product. I was asked by a very large organization to help them buy a building near downtown Dallas. And it was not a big building. It was only about 8,000 square feet, but it was a very valuable piece of land. And I won't mention the organization, but it's a very well-known organization. Let's put it that way. I'll just put it was a religious nonprofit. Okay. And they asked me to help them find this land and buy this property. And I asked them, I spent quite a bit of time with them understanding what they were going to use for the property because the property wasn't well suited for their needs, but because of its proximity to where they currently were, they wanted to buy the property. Well, they did, and I helped them get through that. And then about 3 years later, because they had chosen property that was not best suited for the use they wanted, they ended up listing that property and selling it again. And of course, selling property that soon after you buy it often results in a less than positive experience. So one other quick thing, Eugene, I think many people go into real estate with the idea that I'm going to buy real estate. I'm going to lease real estate. What they should be thinking is, I'm going to buy or lease real estate, and someday I'm going to sell it. And they forget the second part. You have to have an exit plan, particularly in commercial real estate, land, buildings, and things of that nature. Homes, it's not as bad, but you definitely in commercial, you have to know, when I get ready to sell this project that might have $15 or $20 million invested in it, why will someone buy it? And it's got to fit, make sense to sell. So you got to have an exit plan. So a lot of young entrepreneurial types tend to think more about acquisition and buying than they do about selling. Because it's usually, most projects someday will be sold. Very few people buy a piece of property and keep it forever or until after they're gone and then hand it down to their family.
Well, even after they hand it down to the next generation, there's probably going to be a need at some point to exit. And it happens a lot with custom homes as well. A lot of custom home clients build things that are unique to them, without any regard for how it's going to be perceived in the future when
Yeah.
time comes to sell it.
Well, I'll give you another really good example. I'm pulled back because of our interview today. I pulled back some of my files about clients that I've worked with, and this is a story about one that I didn't work with, and I'll explain why. They asked me to help them sell 15 acres of land in a pretty good area, and he had acquired the land directly from the owner without a realtor. And this land was made up of two different parcels. But when they were put together, it was a really nice piece of property, he thought. So when I met with him, I had asked him to give me all the surveys for the property so that I could review the surveys. And he got them to me before the meeting. And when I met with him, it was a very uncomfortable meeting. The land, the two parcels, right in the middle of the two parcels was a pipeline. It was a gas pipeline. And it was a large pipeline. It was a main feeder line. And it was about, I guess, buried maybe 12 feet deep. But there was an easement. And the easement was 25 to 30 feet, depending on where it ran through the property. He could not build all over that. He could not put the roadways in that he wanted to develop the land the way it should be. And it could not be used for a residential development the way the land was configured and the way there was another easement too, but it wasn't nearly as big a problem as this. Now, you're not going to get that gas pipeline relocated. Okay. So essentially what I explained to him was that he thought he made a really good deal when he bought this land from the owner in two different parcels, but he never really looked at what am I going to do with this land and how am I going to use the land? And he never really, and he didn't get them together, replanted. And the result was he had a piece of property that probably was not sellable, at least not for the uses he was thinking. So a lot of people do these things. They see, they have an idea, they start chasing the dream before they understand what the plan is. And I'm sure you've seen this. I think some of the things I read about you and your podcast is about people who said, "Oh no, what did I do? And how do I make this work?"
Yeah, I'm smiling. Of course, audio listeners wouldn't see that, but I've seen way too many properties like that. A lot of our developments, residential or commercial, had to do with critical areas, either steep slopes or wetlands. And not a lot of people realize that when they have a property covered with wetlands, which is common up here in the Pacific Northwest, there are a ton of regulations, setbacks, buffers, native vegetation that could easily render a property practically unbuildable. We were just looking at a property, I believe it was about 2.5 acres, and only about I'm trying to remember 12,000 square feet of it was usable. And so, luckily, the owners there were able to subdivide and create two buildable lots out of it. But they're two buildable 6,000 square foot lots on this giant piece of property. But most of it wasn't buildable because of the wetlands. And I was smiling when you were telling the story about the pipeline. We had a project not so long ago. About 5-6 years ago, we finished it. We ended up building townhomes, but it was surrounded between a stream on one side and one of the major petroleum pipelines on the other side.
Yeah.
And we had to cross the pipeline to, I think, to put a sewer. And it was possible to cross the pipeline with the sewer line, but it took us probably about a year to track it down. We ended up finding that the owner was, I believe it was BP, and trying to find anyone who makes decisions over there to give us permission to cross that line was very difficult. But yes.
Yeah, being a realtor, one of the hardest things for real estate agents and advisors to learn is that sometimes it's much more important to tap the brake for the client than it is to push down on the accelerator. Some clients come up with these, what they believed with great enthusiasm to be a sure win project. And when you are there as an advisor, and this is where you put the client first. And that's why it's so difficult for agents to do, because when they put the client first and it means they're not going to get a commission, it's hard to do that. Especially, I've been in real estate 54 years. So it's certainly at my point now in my career, I can easily put the client first because I'm not in the position of being a new agent who's hustling to try to get a job, get a deal. I think putting the client first, though, and sometimes saying to them, this is not a great idea. It's an idea. It's a great idea, but not on this piece of property. Okay. And so when they have for example, if they already own the land, and they already think they have something of gold. Okay. It's amazing how many great ideas won't work when you already own the land. And so that's one thing I would say is that you have to be cautious. And as a realtor, the fearful realtors are afraid to say to someone, listen, your idea is a great idea, but on this piece of property, it might not work. In fact, I'm not sure it work at all, because they don't want to lose the client or the commission. But the fiduciary responsibility to someone is to give them the truth, even if it's painful. And of course, the way, now, psychology wise, telling somebody they made a mistake and that they've wasted some money. But the solution to giving them that bad news is to be able to give them the good news of some other options that might work. And where you have an agent or an advisor that has not been around a lot, doesn't have a lot of experience, they find a hard time coming up with other solutions or finding a workaround that will work for something.
And I think one of the solutions, especially for those with not sufficient experience who don't know what they don't know, whether it's an agent or a client, is to involve a group of professionals that could help them. Um, this due diligence process, the feasibility study that we spend so much time and energy on, could not be done in isolation of other professionals. I think it's absolutely vital.
Are you familiar with the term information transfer study?
Of course.
Okay, information transfer study, I'm a big fan of it. Information transfer studies take flow of information. Now, with a lot of people, the only information that's being transferred is what they're saying. Okay? It's not what they're hearing. And so many people go into a project, I guess you could relate it to tunnel vision, in the sense that they go into a project only thinking about what they know to be true and not being willing to listen to what the other side of it could be. And so an information transfer study looks at the flow of information. And I've always wondered, how did you come up with this plan, Bill, or whoever it was? And I find out that almost all the planning and almost all the things they came up with were self-generated. They weren't done by someone who is a professional planner or someone who's got an objective third-party opinion. And as a result, they have that tunnel vision, thinking that the project's going to work. Okay. And that can be very dangerous and costly.
So the book that you wrote, Sonny, how did you decide to write a book? What was your motivator?
Well, I'm 73 years old. In fact, Eugene, I'll tell you, I had one podcast host who said to me, I think you're the oldest person I've ever had on my podcast.
I was just going to say that you must have started practicing real estate when you were 5, because you couldn't look more than 50.
Well, I actually got into real estate and multifamily. I was a young college student. I had a wife and a baby, and I was broke. I was on the football team playing college football at Evelyn Christian University. And I was desperate for money to be able to pay for this, because I had a scholarship, but I was desperate to be able to feed that baby and my wife, my young wife. And I went to an interview for an apartment management position as an assistant manager, which was not a very difficult assignment because it was a few days per week. And 2 weeks after I got that position, I was only 19 years old. 2 weeks after I got it, the manager quit. And I tell the story in the book, but he left me with some checkbooks and a pouch filled with money and checks, cash and checks, and left in the middle of the night. So when I went to the apartment owner, to the owner of the complex, it's a small complex, 28 units. I went met with him. After meeting with him for about an hour, intuitively, I think he, for some reason, said, "I want you to be my manager." And I had never even balanced a checkbook, Eugene. And he asked me to be his manager, and that's how I got into apartment management. Later on, he asked me to become a real estate agent and work in his commercial real estate firm. He owned shopping centers and apartments. He became a mentor and a great friend. And I often regret that I didn't keep in touch with him more and pay more attention to him later on, because he was very instrumental in me getting through college and giving me an opportunity to earn my way to be able to finish and get my degrees. My master's degree is in psychology, undergraduate in management with a minor in communications. And I've been a real estate agent 54 years, basically. Agent in
thrown in the deep end.
the deep end. I've got a lot of extensive experience in a lot of things because I did other things while I was doing real estate in those early days, like going to school, playing football, etc. But I think the maturity of having done things and see them blow up is one of the greatest lessons someone can learn, because when you've been through some things that didn't work, you learn more than you do when you do things that work. The book,
Excellent.
when I
Go
wrote
ahead.
the book, my goal in writing the book was to merge the psychology concepts that I had used to become very successful. I'll toot my own horn for just 1 minute. In 2015, I was nominated and became the winner by the Dallas Builders Association for the best realtor in Dallas. I was the only one to receive that award. So when you get a lot of awards in real estate, magazines and different organizations give out awards. D Magazine, for example, but they give out awards to 200 people, 200 agents, maybe. This was one person receiving the award. So it was a particularly valuable. Well, upon receiving that award, when I was already pretty long toward my career, I decided that I wanted to do something to keep other people from failing so much. And it sounds like you've helped a lot of people in that way too, your organization, by helping them solve a problem. They got into something they didn't know quite how to handle. But what I did there was I basically said, I'm going to write a book because I want to help people who go into real estate to be a little different thinking, not be product-oriented salespeople. Think about empathy and how to help a client. And so I wrote my book as a textbook. It's not your typical book. It's not this is the book. It's a 300-page textbook. It's got QR codes that when you scan them, take you to my YouTube channel, and you hear a video or see a video about what you're reading at that point. It's in color. It's got scripts for real estate people, so they'll learn the language of real estate. So when I wrote this book, I did it as I wouldn't say it's a gift, because obviously I'm selling the book, but it certainly is a lot of 2 years to write it. It's a lot of knowledge and information that is very helpful to someone who's going to choose a career in professional services, particularly real estate. So why did I write the book? Upon receiving that award, I thought to myself, I should share what I've done. And as I've gotten older, I've wanted to do that more.
Interesting. And so the book Is it written for aspiring realtors to help them grow their practice, or would you say it's got a much broader audience?
It's got a broader audience, but the real target audience, there are multiple audiences for the book, but the target audience is the person who's in real estate going into it new, or who's been in it for 3 or 4 or 5 years and is not satisfied with the results and the performance. It's about how to build a real estate practice. And the chapter that's probably, I would call the payoff chapter, is a copy of my actual business model that I created to build my real estate practice. Okay. And so that's unusual to give away. In fact, one of the people who could tell you the story if we have time, one of the developers of a very 2,500 acres in Prosper, Texas, which is one of the top neighborhoods in the area, Windsong Ranch. He wrote about the book. He reviewed it and wrote about it. And he had an amazing story. They took 2,500 acres of land that nobody really were anxious to buy because it had so much floodplain in it. When you were telling me earlier about your story about unusable land, this comes to mind. But this group took and developed this land, and they took all that low-lying land floodplain and left it nature, put trails through it, created retention ponds, turned into one of the most beautiful neighborhoods in the entire metropolitan area of Dallas. Dallas has 7.2 million people, the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So it's a major, major metropolitan area. And this neighborhood is arguably one of the most, I live in it. It's one of the most wonderful neighborhoods in the entire metropolitan area, called Windsong Ranch in Prosper, Texas. Okay. It's a master planned community. But what was great about it was they turned a negative into a positive. The fact that there weren't so many, you didn't have every piece of land that you could build on, you took that negative and you turned it into a positive. And his vision for this place is remarkable, because what he did, he turned that negative of having land that was not usable to build on into a reason that you would want to live here, and became an amazing project. When you build, I think it's 3,000 homes on this property, and they range in price from 3 or 4 million to down to probably about 500,000. It wasn't that way when it started, but the project's only 10 years old. So it's quite a remarkable story. But so that's your story that you told really caught me there, because I have several stories like that. I won't go into, because I know you're probably short on time. But I think that the big thing here is that people realize when you look at something, sometimes you have the imagination and sometimes you don't. And sometimes you need to have someone else who's got different ideas and imagination to help you. So I think a lot of people jump into a project rather than plan their way into a project. They come up with an idea and they assume it's going to be successful. I've done that before myself. But they jump into a project without getting enough advice from other people who have more experience and knowledge. A young person who's 35, 30 years old, who decides to do a project without getting advice, often finds out that they have a real problem on their hands. Look for experts that can help you. Subject area experts are essential. That you don't. And some people say, well, I don't want to spend the money. It's going to cost you in the long run if you don't.
That's right. That's right. It's a question of what is it that you don't know, and that knowledge only comes with experience. Many people who are just getting started simply do not know what they don't know, so they don't know what questions to ask.
They don't know what questions to ask, and unfortunately, they frequently have an opinion that their idea is great, and they don't take the time to tap the brake and ask, what's wrong with this idea? Speak to me. One of the most amazing people I've ever known, a guy named Jack Matthews of Matthews Southwest. I had a meeting with him one time. He's developed all over North America. He's from Canada. But Jack, I was talking to him, and he was talking about these ideas and this idea and that idea. And he said, Sonny, a lot of people have good ideas. Good ideas are easy to find. Finding things that work is different. So some people believe in their own ideas so much that they don't take the time to really examine what other opinions would someone who has a more cautious view come up with. Apartment complexes. I've been asked so many times to help people find apartment complexes, and they really don't know what they're doing. And they just get an idea they want to buy into multifamily, but they don't really go to someone who's done it, someone who's really helped people do it. They just jump into it and go out and start buying property. And then they've invested several $1 million into, or $10 million into something. I'm thinking of a particular story, but by the way, the book is available on Amazon. It's also available on other sites, but you can get it directly from my website at realestateBook.org. And you can also go to my YouTube channel. And if someone wants to know how to get in touch with me, all they have to do is go to YouTube and put in Sonny R. Moyers. And there's about 15 hours of me doing podcast available out there on the internet right now.
And the links to all of these contacts is going to be in the podcast description. Of course, link to Sonny's YouTube page and the website to acquire the book.
Right.
Sonny, it's been a pleasure having you. I have probably 20 more questions that I wrote down that I would love to ask you.
Well, let's do another meeting.
Let's do another one, and I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about.
Well, Eugene, I want you to know I did do some research on, I'm a researcher at heart, but I did do some research on you. It sounds like you've got a great company and you do a great service for your clients. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Sonny.
All right.
Real estate development.